With our New Year's resolution in mind, the mirror of a relationship used therapeutically, we're going to look into that today. And I want to emphasize again, as a therapist, I'm interested in things that work. I work with addiction a lot, so anything that helps someone stop using drugs in mental health, anything that makes people's moods feel better, I'm interested in that. I don't really care about the source, I'm interested in whether or not it works. It happens to be one of the teachings of the Buddha that I learned about 20 years ago. Paraphrased, he says, if it doesn't work, throw it out. He said that of religion. If it's not working for you, pick another one, right? Certainly with our perspectives, if it doesn't work, pick another one. And he says that's how you end up uncovering truth. After a while, you notice if it's working, and if it's working, keep doing it. Pretty logical, right? And so I don't really care the origin of who said what truth. I'm fond of saying if my neighbor's 5-year-old kid says something wise like, forgiveness is good, that's true. I don't have to ordain him a prophet or anything like that. But I'm going to talk about a prophet today that's gotten a little bit of criticism. Some people probably wouldn't say the word prophet. Whatever, he's a spiritual teacher named Mooji. And I'm interested in effective teachings. And he's a popular guy. And our group member over here sent a video to everybody in the last week. And we all started talking about it. So we're going to talk about a little bit of it today. But I want to start out with one of the criticisms, because I've heard some criticisms of some spiritual teachers, including Mooji. And one that I came across was that he teaches a simple formula that appeals to gullible people seeking an easy awakening. And that just reminds me of what I've heard so many times of people saying, why does spirituality have to be so difficult and confusing and complex? Thank God for people making it more simple. Thank you, Mooji, for making it more simple. That's a good thing. But there's no shortcuts. No one can have a spiritual awakening by coming up with a simple concept and cut off some corners. It doesn't work. The universe has already long since taken care of that. It's practically why Jesus did his crucifixion, to show you that the law, the spiritual law, is going to be painful. It's Buddha's first truth. There isn't an easy awakening. It doesn't exist. But there's easy approaches and concepts that can be easy. I can illustrate that quick. I could point to a mountain and say, would you like to climb that mountain? And you say, yes. What an easy concept. Have we climbed it just by considering it that way? Of course not. The mountain climb itself is going to be challenging. But the concept is easy. Flying to the moon. The idea of getting in a rocket and doing that, pretty easy concept, but putting together the rocket and pulling it off, that's pretty difficult. Well, awakening is a very easy concept. And again, prophets have all said it one way or another. Jesus said, you are the light. He said, I am the light. Well, then we're all the light, aren't we? Well, are you awakened yet? Know ye not ye are gods? That's in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Ye are gods. Does that awaken you? Buddha says you're also Buddha. Do you feel like Buddha now that I said that? Okay, so just because somebody presents a simple concept doesn't make it simple, that's for sure. So while I can respect all people's perspectives, and this person who said that, okay, fine, I get it, but there isn't an easy awakening. And I'd say it's good to clarify things and make things simple. But if you like complex things, digging in deep things like go read Course in Miracles, really deep concepts, then you can do that. But it can also be simple. Most animals I know are awakened. Nature is mostly awakened because they just go with the flow. And their ego involvement is really low. That's pretty much what awakening is. As John says, I must decrease so he may increase. The spirit must rise in you by the decreasing of your relative ego. That's how you get awakened. Easy concept. Hard to do. And you can't cut corners. It's going to be challenging because every single one of each of our issues is going to be brought up in order to get to whatever awakening is. To get to that point, you're going to be challenged and you don't get to avoid anything. Can't fool Mother Nature, okay? So Mooji had a teaching in this video that we all were watching. He had a line that I like so much. The whole thing was great, but this line in which he said, you cannot beat the mind by being the mind. You defeat it by realizing I am consciousness. And I thought, that's just what we talked about last week. Because all this stuff goes together. Of course, truth is all relative and it's all entangled. So you're going to be able to connect everything to everything else if you're willing to try a little bit. Well, I drew it last week. Simply put, the mind shows up because you're conscious being, you're a spiritual being that moves into a system of superposition, and then you take on a mind. It's an ego mind. It's a physical mind. And it's a relative mind. That matters because wherever your mind was planted, or your brain, where it was placed, it's going to develop differently. Obviously, people in France tend to speak French. people in the United States tend to speak English. It's not always the case, but it's usually the case. That's conditioning. And we tend to wear the clothes and eat the food of the traditions and the customs that came before us based upon culture and stuff like that. It's very obvious. And if you can't grasp that, then you're not even interested in watching this video. Okay? But we have relative experiences inside this world of consciousness. And yours is slightly different than mine. And some people throughout the world is radically different. But it doesn't change the fact that we're still conscious beings, pure blank slates, really, that entered into the system. And then once you enter into the system, you get lost inside the system. Like we said, Genesis 2:21, we fall asleep. Adam was sent into deep sleep, so are we. And then we fall into the customs and the traditions, and we fall in love with the ego. It becomes a false self. What's the whole goal? To figure out that you're consciousness. Just to remember that again. It's what he says. You can't beat the mind by being the mind. Another way of that, of thinking of that from a therapeutic perspective, I've met so many people who are trying to quit drugs by trying to quit drugs. Just say no. And while that works a little, sort of, and it matters in beginning stages of, say, recovery, in the end game, that's not going to keep you clean. The goal is to wake up, to realize that you can have a more powerful drug that you can take. The process of awakening is exactly that. It's deeper, richer feeling. And it's not by deciding to be the best version of my physical self. That's more ego stuff. There is a role for that. And again, early on in the development, as we're going to talk about at the end of this, early on, it makes sense. Because you do need to do things like get fit, for example. It's useful. To go get an education, go make some money, get a job. That's all useful stuff, no doubt about it. But the end game for everyone who's ever walked on the face of this earth, the end game for everyone is to wake up and to remember who they really are as a divine spiritual being. Okay? So, you're not going to beat the mind by being the mind, because each of our minds is lower version of our higher self. And then your mind is now shaped by your conditioning and your experiences and all that kind of stuff, and mine is shaped my way. So right there, that's what relativity is. Remember, Einstein taught in relativity, time dilation and length contraction, that the world in space and time aren't what we think they are. Time is an illusion, he said. Space can change depending on how you're moving. Well, guess what? That's also true for us spiritually. I'm experiencing different things than you, depending upon my origin and where I was born and raised in the time period and all of that kind of stuff. And yet, what do we have in common? The light, the consciousness aspect of self. And that's where we're going to meet in unity. It's not going to be because of all the physical stuff and the physical differences. Okay? Mooji goes on to say, once you defeat it by realizing I am consciousness, because that's what releases you from all your labels. The idea of white American dude, ghost stealers, and that stuff I talk about all the time. No longer do I have to hold on to that. The mere recognition of it, recognition and liberation are simultaneous, is liberating. You feel free. You're like, that's just my costume. That's my conditioning. If a teacher gives me a math equation, what's the integral of 2x? And if you don't know calculus, answer's x squared. I hope I got that right. Might be reversed. The derivative or whatever. If you understand calculus, that's an easy question. But if you don't understand it, that's a hard question. What's the square root of 49? If you haven't learned square roots yet, that's a hard question. And if a teacher gives that to you, are you stupid because you haven't learned it yet? Of course not. Okay? Well, this whole thing is a hard question ultimately. It's difficult to break free from your conditioning, especially if you get taught for decades something about the nature of your world, especially when it's stuff like go make a name for yourself. You'll feel good if you go establish like lots of wealth and you make sure no one disrespects you ever. That kind of stuff, that's ego talk. Along comes a master teacher like Jesus to say, well, you don't really need people to respect you. If you forgive them and you respect them, you'll awaken. Well, that's radical, but if you didn't get taught that, you have to unlearn it. So, everything's relative, and if you can defeat it by saying, I am consciousness, next thing you know, he says, then the same mind, the very same mind we're talking about, will join forces with you and be a wonderful servant. It's phenomenal, because that mind, I'll say, I got a rescue pit bull, love pit bulls. When they're raised well, they're phenomenal pets. Love our rescue pet. Okay? Well, your mind's like that. If you raise your mind well, it becomes a wonderful pet. It's a servant in a way, okay? But if you don't raise it well and you mistreat it and you don't tend to it, it's going to get aggressive and it's going to cause you pain. That's true for all of us. This harkens one of my favorite all-time teachings. Again, I could talk about this for hours. I've mentioned it before, Luke 12:47. Remember, Mooji literally references how your mind can be a servant. Well, master teacher Jesus, Luke 12:47. When a servant knows their master's will and doesn't make ready according to that will, it will receive a severe beating. If your servant, which is the ego mind, knows it needs to be working on spirituality, which is the master, if it knows that, and it doesn't do it, severe beating. Emotions become much more difficult, okay? Circumstances go a little haywire. The world of superposition is set up to give us different experiences relative to where we're at in our development. Math teachers tend to give harder problems along the way to students who are doing better, right? You start out with 1 + 1 = 2, you learn square roots, then you go to calculus. Well, the more you get into your spiritual development, the more the universe shapeshifts with you and gives you more difficult curriculum. Logical, right? Well, the mind becomes a servant at a certain point. It'll facilitate your process. It'll help you focus on what you need to focus on the further you get into it. But if you don't, if the servant doesn't do what it needs to do, severe beating, okay? And then the second part of this line is if the servant doesn't know the master's will and it does what deserves a beating, the beating is less severe. What does that mean? There's a whole lot of people playing in the game of superposition that doesn't have a clue what we're talking about. A whole lot of people, first of all, would mock it, like people mock Muji, for example, or all spiritual people who work on, say, forgiveness as opposed to demanding apologies. Those people get mocked. And as the comedian Bill Hicks back in the 90s said, when people show up and they teach us, the nature of reality, we tend to kill those people, right? And Jesus says, they're going to hate you because of me. Once you become spiritual, the more you get into it, the more a bunch of strange, crazy attacks you start to get. You know it because you can feel it. But if you submit to the Spirit and you allow it to run you, you'll be able to survive and endure. That's what's meant by, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But if you lose your nerve and you don't do what you're supposed to be doing, you get a severe beating. And so yes, that mind, that very mind that causes all the problem, ends up becoming a wonderful pet, just like a well-trained pit bull. And so this links to what we were talking about with the mirror in Krishnamurti for the last couple of weeks, as he said, you're not going to find truth in religion, philosophy, dogma, ritual, behavior, technique, because that's all relative. Because you're going to get taught different based upon the part of the world you're raised in, no doubt about it. And you're going to be told this is what's important, and this is how you get to heaven and stuff like that. That's not sufficient because it's myopic and it's going to be related to just your experiences. It's not broad enough. And so to use the mirror of relationship, and as Krishnamurti said, it's through the understanding of your own mind, the conditioning of your own mind, how you got taught, and in what ways were you taught wrong, and how are you limited. What we do is use other people in the mirrors of relationship in order to do this, okay? And that's why those things are wonderfully linked together. In order for me to learn more about the content of my mind and my own self, I'm going to use you, and you're going to push my buttons exactly as you need to, and vice versa. And not only will you push my buttons of my various weaknesses, you'll also affirm for me various strengths. If you report back to me something that works for you, it's likened unto something that works for me, then we're in synchronicity. That feels better. Now I feel stronger. And I'm going to keep doing that. That's how we use relationship. So I like pulling this all together to call this, because what I drew a week or so ago sort of looks like a book, right? And a little scribbling on a page here. And so this is the world of superposition. Well, let's just call this game we're in lost and found. Okay? Because how are we lost? Well, we're this being, and then we come into this book, if you will, in this story, and we get lost. And what's the goal? To become found, to awaken, to remember who you are. Okay? That's the journey. It's lost and found. The Chinese proverb that we are all on the same journey, those who blame others haven't started. That's like looking at a mirror and saying, oh, I don't like the way you look. Okay? I'm looking at myself. It's directly reflecting me back to me. I can't blame anyone else for that. We're all on the same journey. Those who blame others haven't started. Those who blame themselves are halfway there. Those who blame no one have arrived. It's us specifically look in the mirror because the universe is always showing us where we're at in our journey. And so we get shown by the mirrors of relationship and the people in our lives that are showing us where we're at in our process. It's always happening. It never stops. Buddha mentions the multifaceted jewel everywhere you look. There's another version of you looking back at you. Never stops. It's always there. If you learn how to do that, now you're using the mirror. And so here we have another of my favorite teachings on how to use other people. This from the Tao. Considering the idea of a book, if you are on chapter 3 and I'm on chapter 10 and Joe over there is on chapter 17, is Joe better? Am I better than you because I'm on 10 and you're still on 3? And is Joe better than me because he's on 17? Or is it all relative? So if we're all reading the same book and someone's just on chapter 3, they just haven't got to chapter 7 and chapter 10 and chapter 17 yet, right? They're going to get there eventually. And then they'll know what you know who advanced deeper into the book. It's sort of like watching a movie. You know, spoiler alert. I already did spoiler alert at the beginning. Know ye not ye are gods? Okay? You're Buddha. There, I spoiled it for you. Is it ruined? Now, knowing when someone says that you're Buddha and you experiencing Buddha, those are different things. Someone could tell you, oh, it's a great ending of the book, but you still have to go through it. And when you experience it for yourself, you go, oh, I get it. Yeah, I'm God. I'm a Buddha. I'm the light, like Jesus said. And yeah, that's your experience, like Ram Dass says. Once you've had the experience, no one needs to explain it to you anymore. If you haven't had the experience, no one can explain it to you. You have to read the book yourself. So no, a person who's on chapter 3 isn't worse than someone who's on 17. And yet we live in a world where there's like a million different chapters. And we're constantly judging people for not being on the chapter that we're at. Either better or worse. I'm somehow inferior because you're better than me, or vice versa. That doesn't work. And it's always an echo of our own mind getting reflected back to us. Always. It doesn't stop until, as it says in Corinthians, you see through that mirror. Alice in Wonderland gets through the looking glass, right? Then you can look back and go, oh, I get it. All an awakening person has done is bloomed. You know, they've become the spiritual being that they're always destined to be. That doesn't make them special. Okay? So let me read from you chapter 27 or verse 27 of the Tao Te Ching, just in the middle and the end here. Be wise and help all beings impartially, abandoning none. Waste no opportunities. This is called following the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? And what is a bad man but a good man's job? Okay? So, using the book analogy, if you're on chapter 17 and someone's on chapter 3, you do know more than them. You've gotten deeper into the book. Are you better than them? Of course you aren't. But what's your job? To act superior? You're not superior. You could be a teacher. It's your job, this says. Your job is to help the person along. Hey, keep reading. You're going to learn more in chapter 4. By the way, in chapter 5, this is what's going to say. And if you need to revisit chapter 3, I've been there and done that. Let me help you through that. Now, a person that gets this, the guy in chapter 3, a person who gets it, what is a good man but a bad man's teacher? The bad man is just referencing the person back here. They're not actually bad. The Tao knows this. But it recognizes that the good man is going to teach you. A person who's advanced, let's just say Mooji, great example of it, is someone that we should just listen to. He seems like he's been there. Confucius said, don't interrupt someone who's doing it, okay? The idea seems pretty spiritual. Let's listen to the wisdom. And if you listen to the wisdom and you apply it, like we said at the beginning, it's good therapy. Who cares the package it comes from? It doesn't matter. We're all screw-ups. You know, Buddha was an absentee father, right? As Siddhartha, as a young man, he abandoned his wife and his kid. So do we throw out all of Buddha's teachings because he abandoned his wife and his kid? Some people might. I'm flawed. You're flawed. Everybody's flawed, okay? But wisdom is universal. It unites all of us. And so judging each other, John 7:24, by mere appearances, not going to get us anywhere. But judge each other correctly, Jesus says. If you're applying wisdom, it's this stuff. If you are awakening because you're realizing you're a spiritual being, you're a consciousness being, if you're awakening and dropping the ego mind, if that's what you're doing, then you've got it. And I don't care what form it came in, what package, what label, whatever. It doesn't matter what you did ever. Prophets never talk about that. They never talk about the physical judgments and this person's going to hell because. Religions do that because of the ignorance of our leaders today. What we need to do is recognize that whatever role you find yourself in, you bring the other person along, or you learn from the other person. That's not superior or inferior, okay? And that's what this wonderful verse emphasizes. Be wise and help all beings impartially. Here's how we use the mirror. Every person you see is either ahead of you or behind you in the book. What is the book? The book called Lost and Found. The more awake you are, the more responsibility you have to help the other person wake up. That's it. It's not about helping the other person do their taxes or mow their lawn or give them a sandwich if they're starving. You can do that stuff, and you can do that stuff with spirit, and it can be incredibly helpful. It's very nice to do that stuff, in fact. But you could also do that stuff as a superior being. I'm going to go save the world because I'm in a position with a bunch of sandwiches to go help the homeless people. Wonderful, do that. But you're not better than them. And if you act that way, you're actually not going to help them. We're equals. None of us are better than anyone else. Okay? And so if you, through service and gratitude, and you spread love and the sandwich, now you got it, that's fine. That's how you want to do it. Weave it together. But if it's competing with each other because I picked the right prophet and you picked the wrong one and you're going to hell as a result, now that's more ego stuff. So we treat each other impartially and we abandon no one. That means no one. Every single person that's ever walked the face of the earth is worthy. Everyone. They might be lost way back on chapter 1, maybe you haven't even started the book. But thanks to samsara and long-term picture of how this world operates in this world that we're living in, there's plenty of variability, and we got a lot of time to figure out how to wake up. Your job is singular. Stay connected to the light, continue to wake up yourself, stay focused on the spirit. As the Tao says, bring the Tao to earth, live it, be anchored in the Tao, and then spread it to others. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love another as oneself. That's how simple it is. Isn't that easy? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love another as oneself. That is simple. Is that hard to do? Yes. And yet, it's about the easiest philosophy ever. Okay? So pulling it all together, we're always using each other to learn and develop and advance. Sometimes you're the student, sometimes you're the teacher. In fact, it's almost impossible to always be the teacher, because that would mean you're at the apex. I'd say Jesus was the only one that pulled that off. Great teacher up there, and he was able to, who else was going to help Jesus after all? But the rest of us, we're in that back and forth, ebb and flow. Sometimes you're the student, sometimes you're the teacher. And if you're not sure, you can trust that the universe is always going to teach what you need to learn.